Hey No I listeners, it's fall, and if you're in the know, that means it's Gilmore Girls season. So what more appropriate to talk about than Harvard University? Now, if you're not a Gilmore Girls fan, I'll forgive you, and I'm not actually talking about Harvard because of Gilmore Girls, but Harvard has been in the news for a few reasons, and some of the controversies that have been reported in the media about what's going on at Harvard, I think point us to a common philosophy that, even without people knowing it, undergirds their beliefs about life and what it means to have purpose as a human being in this life. So I want to talk about it a little bit. Now, obviously, there have been a lot of controversies related to Harvard over the past year or so with the Trump administration and federal funding and the ousting of the former president of Harvard University. And I'm not going to get into all that. I want to focus specifically on a controversy surrounding Harvard's academics. So I'm going to go back to an article I actually read a while ago, published in The Atlantic, talking about how there is an issue of grade inflation at Harvard University. So let me just read a little passage from that article to you. During their final meeting of the spring 2024 semester, after an academic year marked by controversies, infighting, and the defenestration of the university president, Harvard's faculty burst out laughing. As was tradition, the then dean of Harvard had been providing updates on the graduating class. When he got to GPA, the dean couldn't help but chuckle at how ludicrously high it was, about 3.8 on average. Oh, that's almost a 4.0, okay? So almost perfect. The rest of the room soon joined in, laughing, according to a professor who was present at the meeting. Continuing to read, they were cracking up not simply because grades had gotten so high, but because they knew how little students were doing to earn them. Last year, the university set out to study the state of academics at Harvard, and the Classroom Social Compact Committee released its report in January. Students' grades are up, but they're doing less academic work. They skip class at a rate that surprises even the most hardened professors. Many care more about extracurriculars than coursework. A majority of students and faculty we heard from agree that Harvard College students do not prioritize their academic experience, the committee wrote. So that is the passage from the Atlantic article. In other words, last year, after all of these big things had been happening at Harvard with federal funding being pulled and everything else, the professors that were gathered for this meeting were actually laughing at how high the students' grades had gotten due to grade inflation, because they knew they weren't doing anything to actually earn those grades. And I mean, that makes sense. Harvard is the oldest university. It outdates even the United States of America. It was founded back when we were still the colonies in the 1600s. It has long been considered like the most prestigious of the Ivy Leagues, and people go there for their academics. It's not easy to get into. So the people who attend Harvard are smart people. So in an academic environment like that, though, you don't expect the average grade to be nearly perfect. So Maria Bear at World Magazine is reporting on this. Grade inflation has reached an absurd fever pitch, she writes. A full 60% of marks given to Harvard undergraduates are now A's. So this is, again, Harvard's dean of undergraduate education, who said, our grading no longer performs its primary functions and is undermining our academic mission. Bear at World Magazine says that Harvard has entered its participation trophy era. What they have done and what they are now discussing doing is changing that, because obviously that's a problem. Harvard has talked about we need to go back to high academic standards, stop the grade inflation, crack down a little bit, and kind of focus again on what makes Harvard Harvard. So in response, though, and this is what I actually want to talk about, and I don't know, because I don't actually know any students that are at Harvard University, but it has been reported by multiple news organizations, including by Harvard Crimson, so Harvard's own newspaper, that students are not happy about that. They are not happy about the possibility of academic standards being raised. So I just want to read a couple of quotes. Again, this is pulling from World Magazine, who's done this reporting. A freshman named Sophie reported her soul was crushed not by the implication that her grades and by extension her entire education are completely meaningless, that's bare at World, but by the foreboding that professors might up their standards in response. I was looking forward to being fulfilled by my studies rather than being killed by them, another student said. Their classmate felt similarly worried that she wouldn't be able to, quote, reach her maximum level of enjoyment. Another quote, if that standard is raised even more, it's unrealistic to assume that people will enjoy their classes. Bear goes on to write, I don't know why or how young people are somehow achieving acceptance into Harvard University with the impression that the central purpose there and in life generally is to enjoy themselves. It would be absolute prison to go through life with the belief that nothing is worth doing unless one is personally enjoying every moment of it. That is really what I want to focus on, because this, not everybody, a lot of people are reporting on this reaction from a lot of Harvard students and kind of laughing about it and making jokes of like, these students at this super elite university are actually going to have to work to get their A's instead of having them handed to them. And so they're kind of making a joke about it. But I actually think that this is a pervasive viewpoint in our society and in our modern culture, that the purpose of life is to enjoy oneself and to find fulfillment in what you're doing. And from that perspective, why would you be paying all this money or have worked so hard to get scholarships or whatever it was, or even potentially be going into debt to be at Harvard University? And why would you go through all that if you weren't going to enjoy it? If you weren't going to enjoy yourself? But I think that actually applies to a lot of people. Maybe they're not at Harvard University, but maybe they do, even if they don't realize it, expect life to be an enjoyable experience. Now, that is problematic for several reasons, and I want to take just a few minutes in this episode to go over some of those reasons. And it does relate back to things that we've been talking about this year and in this series. So the first reason that assuming that our purpose in life is to get the most enjoyment out of it possible, the first reason that's problematic is because it sets you up for disappointment. Because not all aspects of life are enjoyable. They're just not. And you can't control your circumstances. And a lot of people are under the illusion that they can, and they can't. There are things that happen. We can't control other people's actions. We can't control accidents and tragedies. We can't control things like sickness, things that happen to our own bodies. There are going to be seasons of life that are not enjoyable on the surface, and that is okay. It doesn't mean that they can't be fulfilling or that we can't find joy in them, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But if we assume that life needs to be enjoyable for us to be fulfilled, to have a good life, then when we get to a part of life inevitably that is hard or not very fun, then we're going to be really disappointed. It also sets you up for unmet expectations in relationships in particular. And I wanted to highlight this because we are in our series on family formation. This is a little bit of a break from that, but it does relate, because if you, again, assume that you are supposed to enjoy everything in life, then why would we've talked about this in the soulmate episode, why would you enter into a marriage unless it was for your personal enjoyment and fulfillment? Why would you enter into a relationship? Why would you even invest in friendships or deeper relationships with extended family if it wasn't serving you and making your life more enjoyable and more fulfilling? Why would you have kids if you didn't think they were going to be fun? And when you start thinking about how hard it might be to have children and how many sacrifices you might have to make, sacrificing things that you enjoy, like maybe aspects of your job or your social life or your finances, then why would you do that? That doesn't sound very fun. And so it really does impede our relationships with other people, or it sets us up to have expectations that really weren't ever grounded in reality, but expectations that we held nonetheless, unmet, and then again, setting us up for disappointment. And this is what I want to focus on though. If we assume that life is for enjoyment and that is how we get fulfilled in life, then it's actually going to stunt us. It's going to stunt our growth as human beings. It's going to stunt our ability to actually find joy in various aspects and facets and seasons of life. Because what we've done is we have flipped and inverted the way things are supposed to work. So if you want to talk about the purpose of education, we are operating, I think the majority of people today are operating under a very utilitarian understanding of education, that we go to school so we can learn, certain facts and certain skills so that we can graduate, so that we can go to college and get a degree, so that we can get a job and earn money. And so there are certain things, and we've been seeing this. We've seen it in grade school. We've seen it in colleges, even again, very prestigious colleges, where they're kind of slicing things off that it's like are not practical, air quotes, and don't actually serve some sort of purpose of preparing somebody for the job they think they're going to get. So I'm a big fan of classical education. I am a fan of it because it really, I think, does a better job of identifying the purpose of education as a whole, which is not just to prepare us for life in the real world or for professional work, and a good education will do that, but it's also to form us as human beings. It is to help form our souls, to train us to understand virtue and to live lives of good character, to know the difference between right and wrong, to be able to actually think critically as we go throughout our lives and are constantly presented with new information, new developments, new events happening in the world. And so education, and in its truest form, is a lot more about character development and development of the person, rather than just giving you a set of skills so that you can go and do X, Y, and Z, essentially, go work and be a part of the system. It's a lot deeper than that. And when you understand that, you realize that part of education is allowing yourself to be formed by the process of learning. And this applies to academics, but also other things, including like when you do start a new job, or when you're trying to learn a new skill, or you're reading a challenging book, or you're wanting to learn more about a person in your life. Whatever new thing you are presented with, whether it's in class or just in the real world, quote, again, air quotes, as we like to say, it's a process. And you should approach that process with a willingness to be formed by it. I think we can all look back and think about parts of our education, maybe not even your academic education, but something that you learned or accomplished or achieved, and recognize that parts of it were not fun. Maybe you were training to run a marathon, and when you started, it was not fun to get up and go and run because it was physically painful. I'm actually working on a master's degree right now, and so I'm back in the academic world a little bit. And I love what I'm learning, but I don't always love the fact that I'm having to rush through reading or write a paper late at night when I'm tired. Or I don't always love the difficulty of trying to grasp a new concept. I didn't love certain classes in college that I didn't click with immediately, or that it didn't come easily to me. That wasn't as enjoyable of a class. But I'm really, really glad that I went through it. Okay, let's just take economics as kind of a bad example, but it's an example that comes to mind. I think I got a C in my economics class in college, in undergrad, and that's okay. Not everybody's going to be a genius at that kind of thing, but I still grew a lot. I learned a lot. I was challenged by having to discuss and read about things that weren't, naturally interesting to me. And when I did get out into the workforce or just in life, and I'm, reading newspapers, or I'm trying to understand what's happening in the economy and how it's, practical effects on my life, I don't understand everything fully to the extent of somebody who's an expert in that area, but I do have a foundation of being able to understand that I wouldn't have had before. Same thing with something that, in my opinion, is a little more fun, like literature. There are a lot of things that I've learned through classes on different books, classic novels that have shaped culture, different themes, how we interpret them, worldviews of different authors, so that when things come up in day-to-day life, then I am able to recognize so much more because I'm familiar with this kind of cultural lexicon going back through history that I'm able to actually click with and kind of understand. And so it broadens my enjoyment. Going back to Gilmore Girls, it is a lot more fun the older you get, I think, to watch that show because there are so many cultural references to books, to movies, to music, to politics that were happening at the time. And you get more enjoyment out of it whenever you get more of those references. And it's like that in life too. So sometimes you have to challenge yourself to learn new information. And it's not always fun. It's not always an easy or enjoyable process. Sometimes it's even stressful. Sometimes it's even painful. But once you've gone through that and you've allowed yourself to be formed by that, then your capacity for understanding and actually finding joy and interest in different aspects of life is greatly expanded. You have a greater capacity for enjoying the fullness of life and of the world and the universe because you have gone through that process of allowing your soul to grow through education. But today, we've really inverted that process because if we're operating under the assumption that we need to be entertained or find enjoyment in everything that we're doing, then we're not going to expect or even allow ourselves to be expanded by something else like the process of education. Instead, we're going to expect that thing to mold itself around us. We're going to expect education, the educational process, or whatever we're trying to learn, to adapt to and conform to who we already are at the status quo. But think about how small that keeps you. Billions of people over history have learned and created and developed, and there is so much about the world that we don't even know as the human race. There's certainly so much that as individuals we don't know about each other, about certain subjects, about topics. So again, it's not just about formal education, but if we approach life thinking that everything has to conform to me at my current level where I am so that I can enjoy it, we never grow. Sometimes you have to grow. You have to allow yourself to be stretched and challenged so that you can enjoy more things. And really, I think that's the heart of education. But so many people today, we don't have that. We've forgotten that. We've forgotten what we're here for. We've forgotten that we were created with a purpose and with a design, and that our purpose, part of our purpose here, is to actually enjoy our Creator and use the mind that He's given us, which includes like growing that mind and actually learning more and applying our gifts of reason and critical thinking. We weren't created as gods who have, everything that we encounter in life has to then be subservient to us. And that's actually a very consumerist mindset. And something else that you might have picked up on is it's a very privileged and elitist mindset to think that life needs to be enjoyable. Because for some people, the very wealthy, they can kind of manufacture a life like that. Again, there's certain things beyond our control still. Things like health, a lot of times, or other people's actions, mental health internally. But if you've got a lot of money and resources, then it can be easier for a time to kind of mute some of those natural hardships in life, or at least turn the volume way down. But for people who don't have those resources, I think it's a lot easier to recognize the hard parts and the unpleasant parts of life, because you're going to more quickly encounter things in life that are just like not enjoyable, and there's no pretending. There's no pretending that, working 3 jobs to provide for your kids and make ends meet and hoping that, you'll have enough money to buy groceries next week. There's no pretending that that's fun. It's just not. Now, this leads me to something that I talked about a few months ago, where even though the wealthy can kind of mute some of those like more unpleasant and harder aspects of life, at least on the surface level for a while, it doesn't actually mean that they are truly flourishing on the inside. So back in July, I talked about something called the Global Flourishing Study. This was a 5-year research project from Harvard University, also Baylor University, also Gallup, some other organizations as well. So these are like the best of the best researchers and scientists looking a little bit deeper than something that's called the World Happiness Report, which generally points to like some Scandinavian countries with high GDPs and a bunch of, kind of social services in their nation as being the happiest on the surface level. So people are always like, oh, Sweden, Denmark, those are the happiest nations. The Global Flourishing study actually looks deeper, though, beyond just, again, kind of economic measures for how easy your life is. So I'm going to read a little bit. This is a report on that study from the New York Times. And if you want a full conversation about the Global Flourishing Study, I'll link that episode from back in the summer. But this is what the New York Times reported. The only high-income countries that ranked in the top half of composite flourishing were Israel and Poland. Most of the developed countries in the study reported less meaning, fewer and less satisfying relationships and communities, and fewer positive emotions than did their poorer counterparts. Most of the countries that reported high overall composite flourishing may not have been rich in economic terms, but they tended to be rich in friendships, marriages, and community involvement, especially involvement in religious communities. Again, if you want kind of the full breakdown of that, then you can go back and listen to that episode. But it relates here because if our assumption is that we have to enjoy life, that naturally leads people to prioritize wealth because it seems like monetary wealth is what can prevent you from having to go through some of those harder, unpleasant, unenjoyable parts of life. But that whole assumption is wrong, because it assumes that we are kind of like pop up on earth as the consumer and we get to go through just in consuming everything that we enjoy as a status quo. We never challenge ourselves to grow, to go through hardship, to go through achievement, to get that deeper meaning and satisfaction that actually broadens our capacity to find deeper joy and flourishing in more aspects of life. We talk about this a lot on the Know I podcast, that in order to have meaning in life, in order to really be able to flourish, like the study talks about, we have to know who we are. We have to know why we were created and who we were created by. So the Christian worldview provides the answers to all of those questions, telling us that we are image bearers of God. That means we reflect Him. We share in His nature, including rationality, but also relationship. And so when we operate in that nature, when we operate in our God-given nature, and we realize that we are here to enjoy relationship with God, enjoy relationship with other people, and represent Him here on earth, including by using our minds that He gave us to explore His creation and to help take care of it, we will be so much happier in life and enjoying relationships when they are meaningful, deep relationships. Those are relationships that are sacrificial. Those are relationships that you really are on a deeper level. And you can't get that if you're just trying to keep it all surface level and enjoy every aspect of it. So, I mean, it's kind of ironic that sometimes the relationships that end up meaning the most to you are not the ones that are just constantly fun all the time. And I'm not talking about toxic relationships, but people who make sacrifices for somebody and really invest in, and they're also being invested in. So like marriage or relationships between, parents and children, longtime best friends, where it's like, think about people who talk about somebody who's extremely close to them. They probably aren't only talking about like, oh, we always go out and have such a great time together. It's, they were there for me when it was really hard. When I went through something in my life, they were the ones that showed up and helped carry me through that difficult season. Whenever they went through something, I showed up and I was there for them. I gave of myself for that person. Every single moment of those parts of the relationship or those parts of the story were probably not fun and enjoyable. There was probably a lot of sadness and mourning and hardship and sacrifice and long nights and feeling tired and feeling stretched because you were sacrificing yourself for somebody else or somebody else was doing that for you. But the bond is so much deeper and more meaningful. And then you actually, over time, you end up getting a much deeper sense of enjoyment and meaning from those relationships. And it's the same thing with like accomplishments. If you think about people who have accomplished these great things or that, they are very talented or very skilled, they talk about practice. They talk about how it was hard. They talk about how they, worked and worked and worked and they failed over and over again before they finally achieved something. And there's an inherent sense of fulfillment and meaning in that when you overcome an obstacle and you achieve something. But like I said earlier, it also expands your capacity to enjoy all the wonderful aspects of life and of this world that we've been given. So I wanted to talk about that for a few minutes because it has been in the news. And while it's funny to kind of laugh or chuckle at students at Harvard University who are unhappy that their grades might not be inflated very much anymore, on a deeper sense, I think it's can be a gut check for all of us to think, Am I going through life with a consumer mindset, expecting that I am going to enjoy or that I need to enjoy everything in order to be fulfilled? Or am I willing to grow? Am I willing to be challenged? Am I approaching life with more of a curiosity mindset, a generosity mindset, a service mindset of how I can actually connect and find deeper meaning in the world and with other people and with the Creator? So I'll leave you with that thought. We'll jump back into more stuff specific to family formation next week, but let me know what you think. And as always, if there's a topic that you would like me to cover on the Know Why podcast, comment below or check us out at knowwhypodcast.com.